Sad ćemo. NIKOLA PUHARIĆ, Chairman of the Governing Board of Youth Initiative for Human Rights, Croatia. Hello, Nikola.
Hi, and thanks for having me.
Thank you for finding time for us. Over the past years, you have been working a lot in the fields of transitional justice and dealing with the past. So what can you tell us about the dealing with the past process in Croatia? Where are we now, and what are the obstacles that we are still facing?
So, now, again, thank you for having me on this interview. And I would say that I think it's a very broad and sometimes a difficult question when trying to analyze the situation of dealing with the past and reconciliation right now in Croatia. And it's also very much connected to the situation that we have in the region. I would say that we don't have a lot of progress, but we have maybe small progresses which were made I would say in previous year, in 2020 in Croatia, when we had officials and decision makers on a high level trying to participate in commemorations for the victims of the other, let's say, of the other side. Here we had a very good example during the commemoration for the victims of Operation Storm, which is being held every year in August. And this is in '95, this was a military operation during which dozens of Serb civilians were killed, and many of these people also were displaced. Between 150 and 200,000 people fled Croatia towards Bosnia and Serbia. And since that happened, Croatian governments were never able to cope with it and to deal with the crimes and especially the violations of human rights which were made during and after that military operation in '95. And I would say that the progress was at first trying to neglect that the crimes even happened, maybe in the first years after the military operation. Then after that, we had sort of this kind of discourse in which everybody, or I would say political elite, which was also then transposed to the general public, that crimes were being committed, but it was they always had some sort of a justification, something like people deserve that, or the crimes were committed, but there was only few of them, and these were some incidents, and it was not a part of a let's say a general politics that were being done by the Croatian political and military elite at that time. But I think this kind of thinking is still present. But at least in last year, we had something of a kind of we had visits of prime minister on the places where these crimes were committed, and acknowledgement that the crimes were being committed by the Army of the Republic of Croatia. And I think this was something that for us as human rights activists was kind of I would say we were very surprised in a positive way, because we never expected that to happen, I would say, because in previous year, in 2019, for me and for my colleagues working in this field in Croatia, this was unimaginable at that time, because I would say still this kind of a nationalist notion of looking at the war and things was very, very strong. And after that, a different government was being established in Croatia, and we had Serbian National Minority Party being a member of the government. And I think this made sort of a progress also in this dealing with the past, especially the past of war crimes being committed by Croatian army towards Serbs in Croatia. And I think this was kind of a progress last year, because at least we have this acknowledgement of that crimes were committed. And but still we have a lot of work to do. There is especially in the judicial part of this trying to be relatable to the crimes being committed at that time. Still, we have only 1 or 2 judgments being made in Croatia for the crimes committed during this Operation Storm. And I think there is still a lot of progress to be made, and especially in the kind of what actually those crimes and the politics during that time meant in Croatia and in the region. I think we still are kind of finding a way towards kind of admitting that the politics of that time was not, let's say, very inclusive, and that these kind of crimes were also had this political ethnic dimension, and not just, I would say, these were not incidents, and as something that our politicians were trying to say mostly. But in other regards, I think we are still in a kind of a stalemate position, especially in regards to relation between Croatia and Serbia, Croatia and Bosnia. I think in relation to a relationship between Croatia and Bosnia, things are even worse, especially after Croatia had a new president, which
Yeah,
was last year.
that is
Yes.
exactly what I wanted to ask you, because you know it was awesome hearing those positive, you know, sides of the dealing with the past process. But then again, we have the president Zoran Milanovic, who is, well, not that positive, so to say. Can you tell us a bit more about him and his rhetoric that he uses?
Yes, I mean, we are talking about especially people who are at the, let's say, the highest position in the politics, because they are kind of the people who are making the decision in towards the relationship between these Balkan countries, and their statements are something that is kind of a the consequences of their statements are very much visible on a, let's say, lower level, and we can really feel them as being just a regular citizens traveling between these countries and working between us and just cooperating with each other. This can very much influence our everyday life. And coming back to election of Zoran Milanovic, I would say that this was something that was a great downside in Croatian, let's say, dealing with the past and also regional cooperation in general, because he was elected as a guy who everybody kind of perceived him as being a more liberal, more progressive, someone who is open towards different opinions, towards minorities, towards other countries. But somehow he rejected to have this kind of discourse in his politics and in his statements. So he became sort of a nationalist strongman that we were able to see in other Balkan countries in the region, and very radical nationalist that can be compared with right-wing populist parties that we have here in Croatia, but also throughout the whole Europe. He, me and all my colleagues, being a part of NGOs in previous years, we were very worried about the statements which were made not just for Zoran Milanovic, but also the previous president, Kolinda Grabar-Kitarović. She was kind of a leader of right-wing populism here in Croatia, but we kind of thought that there couldn't be worse president than her in terms of dealing with the past and regional cooperation, but somehow Milanovic showed us that this can be possible. And his statements and his relationship towards especially Serbia and Bosnia is something that we should not be proud of. And he's the guy who is kind of rejecting for example, judgment from the International Criminal Court for former Yugoslavia, who is very supportive towards war criminals in Croatia. and is also very supportive towards politics that were being made in Croatia during this wartime years in the early 90s, and especially towards the first president of Croatia, Franjo Tuđman, who is a member of joint criminal enterprise if we are reading the Perlic case before the ICTY. So this is not something that we should be proud of. And this is definitely something that it's a downside in Croatian dealing with the past in the last 2 or 3 years. And I think that the things will go worse because he's a guy who cannot be stopped so easily. He's a guy who gets angry all the time. And especially if journalists or if media or NGOs are trying to kind of warn him about the bad consequences of his statements. So I think that the course of his politics will not be changed until the end of his mandate, which will be, I think, 25 or 24, 25. So we will have at least three more years of seeing this. And I actually don't know how this will end, but I think that it won't be as good as we thought that his mandate will be when he was actually running for the president. And during his campaign, we saw something different. And now we are seeing a very nationalist politician that can be a threat to the region in general, I would say.
How are, civil society organizations who talk about these topics, how do they work in Croatia? I mean, what is the climate that they found themselves in right now? I mean, it's not much of a difference because of the previous president, but how does it look like today?
Well, I would say also that the climate also for the NGOs is very much different than in the other countries in the region, because Croatia is an EU country, is a member of the European Union since 2013. And the kind of relationship towards the war and also towards the region in general is different than, I don't know, than we have it in Serbia, Bosnia, Montenegro, Kosovo, or any other country, because Croatia kind of considers that it's a part of the EU and it's not part of the Balkans, and that is why Croatia always has this notion of not being a part of Balkans. I mean, that is why political elites think, but I would say the NGOs and society in general is kind of always driving towards the other countries in the region, and cooperation is still on a high level, I would say. And trying to work on these topics, I think it's much more difficult than it was 3, 4, or maybe 5 years ago, because there is, I would say, there is not a lot of support towards NGOs working on these topics, because this is not considered as an issue dealing with the past or regional cooperation or transitional justice. These are not the topics that are, I would say, these are not focal points for European Union or, I don't know, any other foundations, donors that can help NGOs into doing their jobs in these fields. So I would say that we in Croatia are working on these topics sporadically, not systematically. And especially these topics are a part of the media and public discussions during, let's say, so during the commemorations, during the time of the years when we are remembering the victims, or let's say big military actions during the war. And there are always, of course, organizations and people that are working constantly on these things, but it's not so visible as it was, I would say, several years ago. And it's difficult for me to understand why. I think that it's not that problems are not there, they're still there, especially in the terms of acknowledgement that certain crimes happened and that we should pay respects towards the victims. But I think that in a way, it's for media and also for the NGOs and the public in general, I think it's difficult to deal and to work on these topics, because I would say that there is not a lot of support, and that the interest for these topics is not on a high level, I would say. Although maybe this is just one way of seeing things. I know when we are also working with young people, when we have workshops and when we have these programs for young people, that there is always a high number of applicants, and that especially young people are interested in these topics, and that especially because there is not a lot of information that is provided to them by the public service or education system in general. So it's difficult to say why is that, why is the public interest in general low, but when people are presented with certain things or with certain content from that time, which is not a priori nationalist in general, then I think we have much more interest.
Well, it is great to hear that there are young people who are still interested in those topics and who want to learn more about them. Thank you for telling us, about Croatia and bringing a closer view to the circumstances that are occurring there. What are some of the biggest challenges of other Balkan countries, apart from Croatia, and what would be some ways to overcome them, in your opinion?
You mean the challenges in terms of dealing with the past, or
Yeah, in terms of dealing with the past, like, do looking from Croatia towards Serbia, towards Bosnia and Herzegovina, how do you think that you are sharing the same problems? What do you see as obstacles?
Well, I would say that we are sharing mostly the same problems, and they are mostly focused on not being able to recognize the crimes that were committed during the 90s, during the war. That we all have problems with judicial system, and not being able to prosecute war crimes, and also not being able to learn from the judgments and also from the proceedings that were made before the ICTY. I think that what we also have problems with is having nationalist political leaders in all of the countries. This is something that has been a constant since day one, I would say. And even if we have elected some progressive politicians in Croatia, it was on various occasions, they still somehow become nationalist when it comes to 90s, let's say, and dealing with the past. So this is kind of a topic that nobody, I think there was only a few politicians that made progressive kind of achievements in this field. And even if they are coming from the progressive parties, they always kind of fall into this nationalist pit of kind of trying to deal with the past of the 90s. I would say some of the good examples were made at the beginning of 2010, like with presidents being Ivo Josipovic, Boris Tadic in Serbia, and Ivo Josipovic in Croatia. And after, I think these were maybe the last progressive, I would say, achievements being made in the last more than 10 years. And after that, we were seeing nationalist after nationalist politician being in power in all of these countries in the region. Looking at the things from Croatia, I think the most worrying situation is in Bosnia and Herzegovina, because of the, let's say, the influences that were made from politicians from Croatia and Serbia on the political leaders of Croats and Serbs in the country. And what we are also we are never kind of were able to go against the denial that was being made also in Bosnia, especially in terms of crimes committed in Srebrenica and also other crimes. But I think this is kind of the kind of a good example of how things were not progressing in the last 10 years in terms of dealing with the past. For me, I think the solution, I don't know if it's gonna come or not, but I think in the last 10 or even more 15 years, the politicians which were being elected in these countries are always having this kind of a nationalist agenda, and there is kind of no way out of there. For me, the Croatia is kind of out of the whole Balkan story, not in total, but in part. It's not Croatia is not a part of Regional Youth Cooperation Office, and a lot of different initiatives which would help in reconciliation and transitional justice processes. And I think this is very bad for our country, but also for the Balkans in general. But we will see. I think kind of the path towards European Union is something that can maybe bring these countries closer together, and maybe also in the terms of dealing with the past. Because at this point, if we are all part of the European Union, then I think we will have to work together, and there will be more political and other mechanisms of cooperation that will be there. And I think this is something that can work towards cooperation being more easy and easygoing, and I think this is something that can help us in the future.
Thank you very much, Nikola, for your time and insights. It seems that we are much more similar than we think, and that we certainly have a lot to learn from each other and work more closely together. So thank you for talking to us today.
Thank you for having me.